everyone to the Sydney CBD premiere of The Trust Ball. I'm Cathy Vogan. I'm going to be emceeing a Q&A and discussion after the event, and I would hope that you can all stay around for that. I have seen The Trust Ball. I've had the pleasure of attending the London premiere, and I can assure you, you're in for a wonderful experience. Just sit back, and it's a marathon, but it is absolutely wonderful, and there's just that dramatic scene at the end that took my breath away. Okay, so I would like to welcome Mr. Kim Staton. He is the director and writer of The Trust Ball, and he's also the founder and director of Films for Change. He won an award last year in the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival as Best Emerging Director, Australia. Okay, welcome to the stage, Mr. Kim Staton. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Well, this is great to be here in this George Street venue in Sydney, which is where, as Cathy said, where Films for Change began, and lovely to see some of our volunteers from Films for Change here tonight, old school friends, Assange friends, people that are in this campaign, and just wonderful for you all to come out and be here at this Sydney CBD premiere. So one of my favourite quotes of Assange is, "There is unity in the oppression, and there must be absolute unity and determination in the response." And this documentary is a product of that unity and that cooperation. It's an extraordinary collaboration. I'm just the one-eyed pirate at the helm of the ship, steering us through the wild storm of trying to get a documentary done. But I've had such incredible help. Let me just rattle off a few stats. Over 2,000 people contributed to our crowdfunding campaign. We've had 15 investors because the crowdfunding money didn't quite get us over the line, and especially with releasing the film, we've had to have invested in order to advertise. My lovely partner, Natalia Mignana, really a wonderful asset to the film throughout the whole process. All the brainstorming, any problem that I had, she pretty much solved it. We bounced ideas off through all these brainstorming sessions, and somehow solved every problem. And there's many, many problems when you make a documentary. It's just every other day there's a difficult thing to overcome. Also 24 videographers, 25 interviewees. We've had advisors, the marvellous Juan Passarelli, who's well known for the documentary The War on Journalism. You can watch that on YouTube anytime. I highly recommend it. Julian's brother Gabriel Shipton was incredible help. Aaron Bush is here tonight, works in the industry, gave me a lot of advice. And so, it's just this endless advice, because this is my first film. I really had no idea what I was doing. Actually, a funny anecdote, the first interview I did was with Julian's father, John Shipton, in Melbourne. I went down there, recorded it on my mobile phone and forgot to put it on HD. So big newbie mistake. And funnily enough, a little bit of that interview is in the film, and it just looks slightly blurry, but it was such an important line and we put it in anyway. But thankfully, I hired professional videographers after that. So anyway, the film was released 28th of December in Australia, in a small town west of Cairns called Mareeba Drive-In, a very retro venue. We did a 20-hour drive to be up there. Had no idea if anyone would turn up. We did no paid advertising. 215 people came out in a small town, and we just knew that we were sort of on the right track. And the response has been extraordinary since then. It just continues to grow. We've had 200 cinemas involved so far, something like 800 screenings already, Australia, New Zealand. It's releasing in UK cinemas this Friday night. It's taking off well in the UK, so it just seems like the film is going to get bigger and bigger, thanks to the help of people that talk about it and recommend it to their local cinemas. We're finding this is really helping. But you know, at the bottom of all of this is Julian Assange. He's the one that's inspired this film, all of the action, all of the passion around free speech, protecting our rights. It all comes back to his bravery and his inspiration and his marvellous innovation to speed up the dissemination of truth. So, you know, that's what I always say, you know, it's all inspired by his work and his courage. So I want to introduce the film with a few words. Thank you. One day I hope to meet this man, this brave David who took on a Goliath of an empire, this warrior who threw his own body like a spanner into their wretched war machine, this genius who used his smarts to invent an anonymous Dropbox to protect those reporting crimes, this engineer who designed a pipeline for a torrent of truth, this messenger who showed us that modern wars are all built on lies, this peacekeeper who built an indestructible and immense and mighty rebel library of Alexandria. What would I say if I met this man? First, thank you, and then sorry. Thank you for your courage and commitment to knowledge, progress, and peace. And sorry for being so ignorant and taking so long to acknowledge the weight and value of your contribution to humanity. Thank you very much. 37. Cell number 37. Solitary confinement. A plastic chair. A metal bed. A steel toilet. Indefinite detention. A will stronger than the steel bars of the cage they keep him in. One window 4 inches wide. In view, a family of magpies nestling between the razor wire. And above, an infinity of sky and ideals and principles, visions of peace loftier than they will ever be capable of conceiving. What if everything we thought we knew about somebody was a lie? Would we have the courage to see through it with a fresh perspective? Would we be willing to go on a new journey of understanding? This is a story of deception, lies, bravery, and a man who risked everything to bring the truth to light. Ladies and gentlemen, with the voices of Susan Sarandon, Tom Morello, Roger Waters, MIA, and Jonathan Oldham, I present to you the trustful Julian Assange.
This is generally the view of people, though we don't know much about Assange. But you should know, because whether you know it or not, he is fighting for you.
For your courage and leadership and tenacity in journalism and publishing.
Since 2010, Assange has been held in progressively narrower, darker, colder, and crueler spaces.
He has been detained since the 7th of December 2010 in one form or another.
And we are now here after years of imprisonment.
WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist. A high-tech terrorist.
A traitor, a treasonous.
He has to answer for what he has done.
Assange faces up to 175 years in prison for publishing classified documents exposing U.S. war crimes.
The U.S. government narrative about Julian is a complete fraud. It is a complete fraud from A to Z.
Julian took on the most powerful countries in the world, basically all of them.
We now have confirmed that there were plans to kidnap Julian here in the center of London, or even assassinate him.
No one who instigated that illegal and immoral war has been brought to justice. But the great truth teller sits behind bars.
If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth.
Julian Assange is a hero.
What if everything we thought we knew about somebody was a lie? Would we be willing to go on a new journey of understanding? This is a story of deception, lies, bravery, and a man who risked everything to bring the truth to light.
Mr. Assange shows all the symptoms that are typical for a person that has been exposed to psychological torture over a prolonged period of time. He looked at me intensely and said, "I hate to say this." He then hesitated, visibly troubled and searching for words. And then he finally said, "Please, save my life."
May future generations have the ability to speak without restraint. May our children and their children know truth and have access to information that leads to justice. Wherever Julian goes, free speech goes with him.
If there is a bird that is about to take flight, stretch her wings and rule the skies, may it be a peace dove and no longer a bald eagle.
If you think Assange is a traitor, he's a rapist, he's a narcissist, he's a hacker, I don't blame you because you have been deceived. And if you think you've not been deceived, that's normal because otherwise it wouldn't be deception.
Wow, so I told you about the last scene. Are you all ready to catch him? That's the question. Are you? Okay, well, this is the discussion time with David McBride. Two people that you have seen in the film. David McBride was a military lawyer, barrister. You're a barrister now, but he was a military whistleblower, in fact. And he gave information to two journalists at the ABC. The ABC published this information in 2017. He was charged in 2019, and it has taken 4 years. In fact, David was supposed to be sentenced today. Both of us are not supposed to be here because I've been reporting on David's case in the courtroom, and Julian's as well. That's where I've been in London. And something's come up. New evidence, an expert opinion. From what I gather, there's quite a lot of this opinion. And your defence needs some time to consider it now. But David has been put through the mill as well. And we as Australians should really be supporting David too. Secondly, another David, and this David has been one of the parliamentary friends of Assange. David is our New South Wales Federal Greens Senator, and another former barrister. So we've got legal weight on this panel. David also went to Washington with the delegation and moved to mountains with Thomas Massey, for example, a prominent Republican senator. David has also been part of a letter that went to the British Home Secretary, James Cleverly. We were hoping that he would have a think about whether it was safe to send Julian to the United States. And in fact, it is not safe at all. It is not safe in so many ways. Not safe for his health, not safe as we've been finding out that now there are two major impediments. It's a political offence, so there shouldn't be any extradition. It's against the treaty. And also now we found out the second should be obstruction is that Julian could face a death sentence. So just before we get into your questions and a bit of discussion, the third person on the panel, somebody that I don't know, an independent investigative journalist, Maria Zeee. Pleased to meet you. Yes. So Maria has been investigating abuses of power and has grown quite a platform among uncensored media like Rumble and Telegram as well. She's got quite a following, and I apologise for not knowing you. I'd never seen your face before, and it won't be the last time I'll be looking at what you do. Okay, so if I could just open with a question myself, and then I'll throw it to the audience. And I've been, sorry, excuse me. One of the most important people of all, Mr. Kim Staton. Give him a big round of applause for this. Oh, I'm all right.
Anything to say? Where's he going? He's got no chair.
Yes, so while he's, I don't really need a chair. I'm fine and quite good on my feet. Look, David, I would like you to start talking about this possibility of the death penalty, because this is probably the most serious thing. Could it possibly be now the linchpin, the thing that Britain can't actually agree to?
Well, it's unlawful for the UK to extradite anybody to a third country where they may face the death penalty. And that's just meant to be a black and white law. But of course, I think many of us have seen with some deep consternation the way things we thought would be black and white in the law don't seem to apply in Julian's case. I think there are other critical arguments that have been argued in the appeal case as well. And one of the most obvious ones is the courts should just not accept what a government says to them about what will happen to somebody when they're extradited. The courts have an obligation to independently investigate. And of course, the trial judge, when they reviewed the evidence, on the first occasion, said there was a very real likelihood that Julian would die if he was extradited. Not from capital punishment in that case, it wasn't a legal case, but the medical evidence was compelling. And we've seen that, I think, pretty starkly presented in Kim's film. That went on appeal. The United States government appealed it, and they said it's not for the courts to inquire into what the UK government says. It's not for the courts to review this. They just have to accept what the United States and the UK government say, and they're not allowed to inquire behind it. And the first appeal court said, yep, that's right, we're not going to look into it. And rather remarkably, that was at the same time that other cases were running through the UK court system about the UK's efforts to extradite refugees to Rwanda without any legal review. And one of the arguments that's been run in the current appeal is the courts there said, well, you can't just take governments at their word. That's not what courts are for. They're meant to actually test the evidence. And I suppose this is a real test for if the courts are going to uphold that in Julian's case. Are they going to say courts will just accept whatever a government says and not test it? Or is it the court's job to actually test the evidence? I hope that the rule of law will have some substance.
Yeah, me too. But with this landmark decision from the Supreme Court, where they have said it must be evidence-based, a decision like that, maybe there's hope, but...
Well, of course there's hope. That's why the appeal's been run. But I think many of us fear that if this case is lost, literally within hours, Julian could be on a CIA plane being taken to the United States. And one of the things we asked the Home Secretary cleverly in the UK on behalf of the now growing group of parliamentary friends of Assange was to give Julian the time, if the case is lost, to make a final appeal to the European Court of Justice. We have not had a response from the UK Home Secretary, which I find troubling.
Still no response. That's disgraceful. Could we just pass the microphone to David McBride? David, all of this has happened with your case at the last moment. I only found out when I was on the playback from London. And, can you tell us what's happening?
I don't think it's a surprise to anybody here. The government put in a last minute. There's a lot of similarities to the Assange case. They put in a last minute statement of harm because it became clear that they said, the information is... They caught themselves out because in the trial they said the information is, or some of the information is so secret even the judge can't read it. And then, I mean, it's just, you wouldn't believe it's not a comedy. And they even said, oh, the judge, well, if you read it, you might get kidnapped by a foreign services, and they might torture you, judge, and then you're going to speak. And he went, you're right. Oh, well, I won't read it then. So it's a bit of a comedy. But then so a lot of the stuff was never read. But then they came to the sentencing. We caught them out and we said, well, if nobody has ever read this stuff, including the judge and a couple, except for 3 journalists, how can you say it's actually damaged Australia? And they were like, oh, duh. And they went away and came back with this statement from some unnamed army officer saying, oh, no, very, very damaging. Potential to damage, very potential. It had a lot of potential to damage. And they put it in the last minute. Some cynics say it's because I've had I don't think I've had enough good press, but I've had some not bad press the last week before my potential sentence, and they, as a gamesmanship thing, they thought, oh my God, we don't want him sentenced the week after he's been in the Good Weekend magazine on the cover. And so we'll put in a statement. We know the judge will then say, oh, you're going to have 6 weeks, 8 weeks to reply. And therefore, we'll get him off the headlines in 8 weeks' time. So we're going to have to get another headline in 8 weeks' time. But yeah, it's now the battle of the PR. We're probably, the fact that they are so scared. I'd like to get better PR, but the fact that the way that they are behaving it seems to be suggesting, a bit like Assange's case, that they're pretty scared of the fact that a lot of the public are behind me, and if they imprison me, there's going to be a bit of an uproar like there was when all those ads were playing at the beginning of this. You rowdy audience. I thought we were going to have a riot before the film started.
So did I. David, it is so close because I don't know if you all remember, but after the Afghan war diaries came out, there was this phrase that kept being uttered over and over again, that WikiLeaks had blood on their hands. And there was a very astute comment about that this was about hypothetical blood as opposed to the real blood that had been shed in the war and by the Americans. So we're talking hypothetical harm.
Yeah, exactly. But they'll probably still get away with it. Oh, hypothetical cabinet in confidence about things that happened 10 years ago in countries. We do kid ourselves that this is really some sort of super dangerous thing. Where on the other hand, as you rightly pointed out, an unjust war, lies on a grand scale, war criminals is a little bit worse than a hypothetical cabinet in confidence.
Maria, just please tell us something about yourself before I open it up to the audience. What brought you to this whole environment, this big family now? I think we are all a big family. That's one of the wonderful things that's been a result of us all making this effort over such a long time, that we've all got to know each other. Tell us about yourself.
So I am the journalist at zeemedia.com. It is the largest independent media outlet in the country. But a lot of you may not know that because I've been banned on every single platform multiple times. Banned from PayPal, banned from LinkedIn permanently, banned from banking, and featured on 60 Minutes as some sort of a domestic terrorist. So that's my history, and of course I was debanked right before the 60 Minutes hit piece, so it was like my bank knew that it was coming. And the reason why 60 Minutes chose to make an example out of me was because I talked about something that was on a defence.gov.au website. So I am no stranger to the persecution of the government. In fact, I've worked with an organisation called Our Voices Matter, which we know was targeted for takedown by the government as per the Twitter files which were revealed by Senator Alex Antic. And so, it's not my first rodeo, if I can put it to you that way. But what I've been through is nothing in comparison to, obviously, what Julian Assange is going through. And I really see him as a test case for journalists worldwide. In a time where people are being deplatformed and silenced just because they disagree with the government, which is what I've, been doing since I started media, just challenging the narrative, challenging the media, challenging what we're officially told, and just asking questions. But that's too scary. It's too scary to the authorities or to the mainstream media to get people to think, to encourage people to think. We have hundreds of thousands of people across the country who view our information and then act on it and do something with it, and are concerned about the overarching powers of the WHO, the United Nations, so on and so forth, and what influence they have on our country, or the American government, or China, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter what your concerns are. You should be able to talk about them. But there is more and more a threat on free speech, more and more a threat on free thought. And so the problem that we face is that truly when we say we're all Julian Assange, it is the case. There was a very, very good line in your film, Kim, which is phenomenal, by the way, and thank you so much. About the very people that are persecuting Assange conduct espionage on us every day. Every day. Nothing that you do is secret, and yet everything that they do, they want to keep secret. And so I'm here because of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Give it a round of applause. And then a big round of applause for Kim. I'm going to open it up now to the audience, and I've been instructed to, and I just take this because I've been involved with politics in the pub for a long time, and I've fought so that the audience can speak more, right? It can be a statement, but this time it has to be a question because we are very pushed for time. Can somebody tell me exactly what time it is, actually? Isn't it? I thought, is it 8:55?
Can you what? 9:45.
Great. Okay, so can we ask the first question to Kim so that he can have a chance to speak now? Do I have a question from anybody? And is there somebody handling the microphone situation? Okay.
Do anyone have a question? Phone friend.
Okay, look, firstly I have to squeeze in huge congratulations. You brought me to tears in both times I've seen this. But I just want to say, as a friend, did you realise the monster that you created, the monster for good, when you were early days in this?
Thanks, Ralph. Not at all, because our co-producer, my partner Natalia, and I, we really spent the first 6 months trying to decide if it was going to work, the structure of the film being more about the meaning and less about the what and the when, and getting out of that sort of rut of documentaries where it's a strict chronology throughout, and you're following a course of time. As you all saw, that we just got through that stage in the first sort of 8 minutes with the timeline, and then after that we're very free to move around into different issues and sort of tie them in together. But we had all these brainstorming sessions on the porch of our home. I really clearly remember the day that I said to Natalia, do you think this is really going to work? Is this going to be any good? Maybe we should do something different. And so there was a lot of these. We probably had that discussion a dozen times before I sort of started to think, if we had a collateral murder chapter and we substantiate it with Dean Yates and John Pilger and people like that, and that was before we even got that amazing interview archive, never seen before footage of Syed Mutashar, given to us by WikiLeaks, by Kristen Raffinson, which was, really made that chapter even more powerful. And so it started to take shape, and like the animation of the courtroom with the glass dock, when that was so beautifully done by Nick Simpson from Melbourne, I started to realise, yeah, basically we're making a collection of 23 short films, and we just have to make sure each one is as good as those, and then hopefully the whole will be something powerful. And I guess it just developed and evolved further on from there over the following 2 years. So maybe halfway into it, I started to feel like, yeah, it could be all right.
Kim, how did you get Roger Waters and Susan Sarandon on board?
That was quite tricky, but difficult in one way, but easy in the other. Easy in that, as most of you know, like Julian Assange, because of the weight and significance of his achievements, he has these amazing supporters that are very high profile and incredibly articulate. People like John Pilger and Daniel Ellsberg that are legendary in their own right, and then with the celebrities, I think you find the musicians. There's a lot of musicians behind him, not many actors and actresses, because this is Hollywood. They're supposed to be establishment. They're supposed to just follow what everyone else is doing and don't put their neck out. So a quite different situation with Susan Sarandon and Roger Waters. Roger Waters is a self-made, successful musician. He can really have a lot of freedom. Susan's very consciously decided to, just forgo a lot of future opportunities in the acting career industry. I mean, she recently was smeared with a whole debacle around statements that she made at a protest, pro-Palestine sort of stuff, and they just take her to take her down to the depths of defamation and smear in the media. Anyway, how did it come about? Well, it was kind of interesting because I had this list of 20, it was my wish list of narrators. And I think a lot of people I shared this list with, they're like, yeah, right, you're not going to get them. And I'm just pretty determined with stuff. And I kept asking around, like, someone must know Susan. I mean, some people might remember my Facebook post, hey, 5 degrees of separation. Who knows Susan Sarandon? Actually, someone replied to that and said, yeah, I know someone that knows someone. They can get you in touch. But it was a combination. There's a wonderful fellow, Andrew Crockett, in our area where I live, Northern Rivers. He helped out a lot because he's done various projects where he's worked with celebrities to endorse different projects. And it's just really funny. We were trying for ages to reach Tom Morello. Doesn't really want to be contacted, and then one day Andrew said to me, I think I got you in touch with Tom Morello. I was on the golf course, and this guy, I said, don't you know Tom Morello? And he's like, yeah, I'll message him for you. So, it was sort of random stuff, and the way that Roger Waters came about was like, I did get his email address from a few people, but these people get like 1,000 emails a day. They don't even read them. And it was actually Nils Melzer who, we had that, I collaborated with him to do that, the animation of a section of his book, brilliant book, by the way. What's the name?
Julian Assange.
Yeah, great book by Nils Melzer. It was a section from his book that we animated where Julian says, please save my life. And so after working with Nils for some months on that, then Nils just said, hey, I know Roger, I'll text him for you. And 5 minutes later I had an email and he said, yep, no worries, I'll do the narration. The actual process of doing the narration is a whole nother challenging story because he's a very artistic guy that has his own opinions. So there's a reason why he doesn't appear in the last chapter. It's quite funny. But look, it's fantastic, and we did achieve the goal of having those voices. And obviously, the reason for that is to make it more marketable and open it up to a big audience. But also, their voices are so expressive and wonderful, and so it's a big plus to the film to have them involved, and we're very grateful. And they all volunteered their time, so yeah, it's just tremendous.
Hi, I actually want to cut right to how do we help Julian Assange? Ever since this started, I've lain awake many times. I've written to politicians and they've all said, oh, we're doing what we can, but they're not doing anything. And, you know, I thought, do all the Brits need to get up with grappling hooks and literally tear down Belmarsh prison? Short of that, how do we help him? It just seems that we're in a post-justice world, all of us. How do we help? How do we save his life? Where is the leadership? What do we do?
Well, I might have a first go at that. I mean, one thing you would expect your government to do is to not just do quiet, almost invisible diplomacy. And you know, one thing we've seen in the last little bit was finally we got a vote in the lower house where we saw the government kind of shamed into voting for a resolution saying that Julian should come home. It still didn't say the charges should be dropped. It didn't say that, but we finally got a vote. One thing I would have expected our government to do if they really cared about bringing Julian home was to actually put some assets on the table. And actually, instead of just saying to the United States, well, we're going to, you know, be a little bit noisy about it, or we might finally say something about it, actually say, well, do you know what? Some of our cooperation is on the table. If you're going to treat one of our citizens like this and want to put him in jail for life and potentially kill him for just spilling your dirty secrets, well, I'm sorry, your US Marines are going to have to go home from Darwin. Or the B-52s are going to have to go back to Darwin. Actually put an asset on the table and put some pressure on. But, you know, both Labor and the Coalition just seem utterly incapable of pushing back at all against the United States. And, you know, I was sitting there, this is the second time I've seen the film, and I was actually looking at some of the analysis of power and about how power operates and how we're so, you know, supine to the United States. And it's, you know, we see it in our relationship over AUKUS or military bases. We're seeing it at the moment in refusing to sort of call out the United States and Israel over Palestine. You know, that utterly, I think, bankrupted approach we've shown for that as a government. But then I was also reflecting on, you know, one of the characters you see fleetingly through this is former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. You see fleetingly the former CIA, Trump's former CIA Director Pompeo. And of course, he was the one who wanted options on how to kill Julian Assange and sought the briefing on that. Apparently, Morrison and Pompeo had a very close relationship. They'd catch up every week or so while Morrison was Prime Minister. And if you really want the icing on the cake about our relationship with the United States, Morrison has now resigned from the Australian Parliament. And one of the two high-profile jobs he's taken is as a non-executive director with Pompeo's US consulting firm. Steps straight into that from being, you know, in Australian Parliament, straight into that job. The other job, of course, he's taken is as a consultant with Dine Maritime, which is a company that is established solely to suck money out of the AUKUS deal. The AUKUS deal he signed as a Prime Minister with the United States, handing over billions of Australian tax dollars to the United States. So, you know, I think we should analyse the power, and we should demand our government actually have an independent foreign policy, demand our government be independent, and actually stand up for an Australian citizen, and that means putting assets on the table.
I think it's a different answer for each person. There are people like him who make films. I make films too, but I report from the courtroom as well. There are musicians who write songs. There are lawyers who keep their eye on the ball, and it's the work of all of us together that is making things change. Short answer. Yes.
It's very, very crucial for everyone to be very informed, about legislation that's coming down the pipeline, the goals of government, things like digital ID, misinformation, disinformation bill, things like this. When I talk to people about where that will lead from an educated perspective, for example, look at what the UK's done with the Online Safety Act, and, you know, every personal message that you send will be tracked by the government. Nothing that you do on your phone will not be tracked by the government. And then you bring in things like hate speech. What's hate speech? No one knows. You can't define it because it doesn't exist. Then you bring things like hate speech in, and then all of a sudden everyone's a criminal and a thought criminal. The Bill C-63 in Canada is absolutely terrifying. It actually seeks to put regular people, all of us, like us, okay, under house arrest if they might one day say something that offends someone. This is an actual bill that's in existence in Canada right now. So I think that from an education perspective, it's very important to keep our finger on the pulse and monitor the things that government are bringing in, governments all around the world, so that we can show people that, like I said before, anyone could end up like Julian. Literally anyone. People think, oh, he's a journalist, it's far removed from me, I'm an everyday person. Thought crimes in Canada, anyone? And just go back to the COVID response in Canada compared to Australia, pretty heavy-handed in both countries. So, and we can see things like that coming down the pipeline in this country as well. So very, very important to stop seeing the case of Assange as some far-removed person. It really could be any one of us.
As Australia are part of the Five Eyes, is it almost futile to think that they're not going to put the other one in front? Being Australia, like, oh, no. And in the States and the UK, they're all very quick to cover each other, as we've seen, as you mentioned, some of the names there. Will there be some sort of futility, or is there maybe Australia will break away as Julian is Australian?
Yeah, look, there isn't, there's just one set of eyes, and it's the US now. The Five Eyes is a misnomer in that it just means we work for the US, and unfortunately that's, of course, it hasn't been explained to anybody. Hopefully, when Prime Minister Shoebridge is in charge, we can change it. But it's we have been sold out by the political class of the Labor and Liberal, and they're both as bad as each other. And forced posture. It's actually it's deeper than we can possibly imagine. They own us. The idea you could sack Albanese and replace him with someone else tomorrow. Nothing will change. They totally own us, and they own the sort of the intelligence community in the US is actually dictating what Biden couldn't set Julian Assange free if he wanted to. And so you can protest against that and sort of say, well, how did we talk about Five Eyes? How did we get into Five Eyes? How does Five Eyes sets who the enemy is? So guess who sets, that's why we're fighting China, or that's why we're preparing to fight China, because the US wants us to. We don't have any choice in Five Eyes about who is pitched as the enemy. Assange is pitched as the enemy. I'm the enemy. It's pretty ugly inside the beast, and we shouldn't take. We should be angry about what our political class have done to this country.
Well, we should be angry about the fact they're trying to put David McBride in jail too, and that could be stopped by a signature of the Attorney General. So if you've got nothing else to do tomorrow, contact Mark Dreyfus and ask him to end the prosecution against David McBride. That's a good way of spending the morning tomorrow. But look, New Zealand takes a more independent approach. They're part of Five Eyes, and they don't feel absolutely captured by the United States. There's no, probably because the United States doesn't really care as much about what happens in New Zealand as it does in Australia. But I don't think we should. I accept the power of the security agencies. The ability of security agencies to destroy people publicly if they choose, if they want to. I accept that that's power, but we shouldn't just therefore accept that our political leaders should just surrender to that power. I mean, there is actually separate constitutional power in the Parliament to push back against this stuff. President Biden has a constitutional power to stop in and actually pardon and end the prosecution. We shouldn't just accept that they all have to be like this. And I think we should absolutely push back against it. I mean, David at the moment is facing the brute force of political reality. I find it hard to believe that I'm sitting next to David. I was going to be in Canberra with him because I thought it might be his last day of freedom. And David's crime is telling the truth. Telling the truth about Australians who committed war crimes, none of whom are even coming close to facing jail. The person facing jail is, again, the whistleblower and David. It's genuinely obscene. But the parallels between David and Assange are real. And I don't think we should just accept it has to be that way. We should actually demand politics have some courage and be better.
Okay. I was going to say maybe just another couple of questions and then...
Can I?
Yes. Yeah, you
So-
and then you.
Okay, so this question's directed at David predominantly because you gazumped me earlier.
Which David?
Pardon?
Which David?
Two Davids. Oh, sorry, David Shoebridge. Sorry. You gazumped me earlier with your answer around the lack of political will from the two major parties. And both, in the movie or the documentary and subsequently in what you said that there's a coalition of Greens that support Julian, the parliamentary group. So is there the political will of yourself and those Greens who currently are in the unique position of holding the balance of power in the houses to use those hard assets that you spoke of that need to be put on the table and gently force the hands of those that have government?
Well, two things I'll say about that really quickly. First of all, we have the balance of power when Labor and the Coalition disagree. But when they're absolutely on the same pathway, and here they're both absolutely committed to doing whatever it takes to stay sweet with Washington so that they can drag the United States as our big and powerful friend to look after us in the region, they are absolutely committed the same. So we have a vote on Julian Assange, and if it went down to party lines, it'd be, the Greens, maybe some people from Labor, maybe a couple of renegades from the Coalition, but the institutions of Labor and the Coalition are absolutely committed to doing nothing here. And I think, and in fact the Parliamentary Friends group has members from all across the Parliament. And when the delegation we took to Washington was literally, licorice all sorts of Australian politics, and that was, Washington couldn't believe it, that there were politicians from all across the spectrum actually agreeing on something, sitting in the same room together and demanding that, something that one of our citizens get free. That was quite unusual for them. And individual politicians care about this stuff. And often you have the discussions in the corridor about different issues. And individual politicians will say, well, I'm glad you said that, David. It's a stinker of a bill, but I voted for it. Or I'm glad you said that. Of course we shouldn't be doing that, but they voted for it. Individually they have consciences. But the institution of the Labor Party, the institution of the Coalition, they are so wedded to the US alliance and not getting out of step and complying with the power, that's the problem. It's the institutions. And they call themselves the parties of government. And it's an obscene cabal down there where they actually, they don't want it any different.
There's a question just here.
Back to the question of how can we really solve this? The last time I was in this cinema, I realised when I was on the way here, is I was probably 8 years old and it was my birthday and I came here to watch The Never-Ending Story. And this is the same, like Stella says in her interview, all of these years and everyone has failed Julian. It feels, we feel like we're in this stagnant situation, despite the small developments in the Australian political sphere. I agree with what everybody said about things that we can do and use whatever talents you have. It all adds up. Every little drop of water becomes part of this wave. And my point of view as an educator with this documentary, it reminds me back to this quote of Julian that I always share, which is, he says, "I believe that education is the way to justice." And let's remember that WikiLeaks was about educating the world. And so as an educator, this film is meant to raise so much awareness. And maybe that's the answer, is that awareness will actually create change. Because what if the movement becomes, maybe it's a few million people in the world. What if it turns into 20 million or 100 million? Is that enough? Somebody commented, should we get, pickaxes to Belmarsh prison and knock down the wall like in our animation? I have the same feeling, like, isn't the majority of, isn't the combination, the culmination of the decent people, the majority of the citizens enough to just go to Belmarsh and just basically open the doors and flood in there and say, we're taking him back? But what does that need? Like, what happened in Tahrir Square back in Egypt 15 years ago? 1 million people went to Tahrir Square, and the politicians just got on their motorbikes and got the hell out of there, ran for their safety. I'm not condoning any violence, but I'm just talking about like the power of the majority. And I'm really encouraged by how this film's been, the uptake of it so far, to have 200 cinemas, almost 1,000 sessions already, just 2 months in. And what we're trying to do with this film is push it out. My work with the single-use plastic issue and our work, Natalia and I and the team and all the, maybe there's a few, there is a volunteer here tonight that were part of that campaign. It was a 3-year campaign. We showed films about plastic, the effects on plastic to marine life, to 10,000 people. And even more than that, we showed the trailer of the effects of plastic, so scenes of plastic in the ocean, in the stomachs of birds and turtles, to 2.5 million people. And we're doing the same with this film, except 100 times bigger. In the last week, we showed that trailer to 1.5 million people just in 1 week. And that was because of investors. So if we just had the film and plonked it out there like no advertising, word of mouth, la-di-da, it would already be finished by now. But it's because of the crowdfunders and investors. We are actively pushing it out through Facebook. They can't stop us because the Australian government were too late to realise how powerful this film is. They could have stopped it getting through classification, but it was whisked through it at lightning speed. It only got an M rating. It could have been R and scared away all the grandmas and grandpas, but it didn't. It got an M. So it's already rated. They can't stop it. And I even got registered to run political ads on Facebook, and pretty easily. And so we are pumping it out now, and it's building momentum, and we've reached these millions of people already. So this is, we're going to continue doing this and grow it and grow it. And maybe that is the answer. Maybe it's too simplistic, but maybe it starts from a critical mass of enough people. Like, what happens if 5 million Australians watch this film? Can we make that happen? And that's why I've been calling out for investors, because we can't just plonk the film out there and just have a few screenings here and there and just decide that that's all we can do. Well, my experience was that if we actually promote the film, if we can run it out there every day to thousands, 150,000 people a day at the moment, day by day, people have to take notice because it just comes up on their homepage. So I just think that awareness, it starts with awareness. It's a crazy thing after 14 years of this campaign that we need to build awareness, but the movement, to my mind, is still too small. So the answer to me is awareness, amongst many other things, like keep doing whatever you're doing if you're creative or if you're a politician or whatever. Keep doing that. That's the next step, of course. Do something. Just do something. That's it. Once you know better, do better. That's all.
Just on that, a short answer, and the fact is, and seeing everybody here, especially coming down the front,
I know it's hard to understand, but we have already won this. We have already won. And if you go back on history in the Second World War, and you look at the Nazis had the best equipment and they invaded France very quickly and they invaded Russia very quickly. But they weren't right. They weren't right. And some people think that Britain had actually lost. I can see Jeff Morris is up there, good historian, that Britain had actually lost the war. But they just didn't admit it. They just didn't admit it. And that's us. We are right. We are absolutely right. The US is wrong. This movie is a good movie. People will see it. More and more people will see it next year. Don't underestimate the power of being right. It might not be out this year or next year, but the people, the buffoons like Pompeo, in years to come, and will be the villains in the movies. You guys are on the right side of history. I'm so grateful to you for my own. I'm so happy to see a full theatre, and I'm so happy to see you staying here. But be happy, because I can tell you, we have won this, and it's going to be very, very sweet when it finally gets out.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to thank you for that. I've just got one last thing to say, and that is, of course, we are waiting for a decision now from on the renewal appeal on whether Julian has the right to appeal. I mean, if he does, it could still go on for many years, this story. But what I can say is that it really feels to a lot of us, to me, I was in the courtroom the whole time, and it was different, right? And to Craig Murray as well, some of you may know, he knows a lot about this case. But our feeling is that Julian is going to win this renewal appeal. Possibly on point 8, the real specialty, which it would have to do with the death penalty coming into the picture. But we feel that he's going to win this one. And we feel more optimistic than we've ever felt before. It was really quite different this time. So, folks,
and remember, there's a fire growing in Washington as well. There's a bigger campaign in the UK. There's a bigger campaign in Washington. There's a much bigger campaign in Australia. I think it's actually a growing campaign. It feels fundamentally different in 2024 than it did in 2022. Fundamentally different. And it's the groundswell. It's Kim's film. It's the bravery of people like David McBride. It's all of you contributing to Kim's film. Things feel fundamentally different in 2024 than they did just 2 years ago. And we shouldn't forget how far we've come. So, yeah, let's live on hope.